Welcome to this week's episode of the ISTE Eduverse Talk Series, bringing you EdTech news and ideas from the virtual world to your world. I'm Maggie Murat, Peggy Sheehy in real life, your host for this evening's broadcast. I'm pleased and delighted to have Bernajean Porter, author, educator, consultant, and change maker with me on the show tonight. But before I introduce Bernajean, I'd like to tell you a bit about our series sponsor. Excuse me. ISTE is a real-life membership association that advocates for the effective use of technology in learning. ISTE is home of the ISTE Conference and Exposition, formerly NEC, and the NETS, the National Educational Technology Standards. ISTE provides thought leadership, professional development resources, and advocacy for educators around the globe. Learn more by visiting iste.org/join. The ISTE Eduverse Talk Series is made possible by the generosity of Hewlett-Packard. To learn more about HP's global social investment work, visit grants.hp.com. And now let me take the great pleasure in introducing an incredibly dynamic and multifaceted, multi-organized person, my good friend Bernajean. I best enjoy Bernajean's introduction that I first experienced when I ran across her book, Digitales. And in that book, she describes herself as writer, speech and debate coach, inventor, auntie, teacher of possibilities, media maker, futurist, master of survival techniques when working with adolescents, professional speaker, future search coach, technology consultant, teacher of teachers, long-term technology user, promoter of anything that increases joy, spirit, and outrageous possibilities in all aspects of life for kids and adults, a digital storytelling guide, a Second Life learner and coach, also known as Bernajean Panazzo in Second Life. She likes watching stars, designing group events, mountain living, learning anytime, anywhere, moon glows, adventure travel, can-do attitudes, mangoes, magic, building community spirit, lilacs, ATVing, good stories, and living life juicy. Bernajean dislikes rules of all kinds, loose ends, stale strawberry licorice, people insisting on having their negative and limiting beliefs and letting worst fears rule the day, having narrow choices, and milking cows. Her philosophy is there's always a way. Welcome to my dear friend Bernajean. How are you tonight, hon?
I am great, and it's so fun to see so many of our friends and colleagues gathered with us tonight. This is great, Peggy. Thank you.
Well, I'm very glad you're here. And you know, Bernajean, most people are very aware of your work with digital storytelling after the great success of your book, Digitales, and all the different things you've done with getting the word about digital storytelling out to the masses. But I want you tonight to share a bit about your other work, specifically about some of the work you've done with schools to assess the impact of the technology investments they've made. You've actually done work with a lot of districts, intensive work all over the country looking at all this. So can you start by telling us, what do you see as the state of things from your point of view?
Well, I guess one of the things as I was thinking about starting is when I worked at the Department of Education in Colorado as the state consultant, I just remember the joyful days of someone calling me and saying, we finally have one computer in the building and we're going to have a K-8 curriculum for typing. And they were very excited to take that one machine and make this big curriculum plan. And we've worked years and years to have the kind of access and connectivity that we experience in schools today. So now that we've put that energy into it, we are now at a different place of conversation. And the first slide that I have coming up is a question that I often ask groups. What is it, if you spend the money and you spend the time and all of the system effort and the personal effort to have it, what is it that you want technology to accelerate? So it accelerates something. That's a comment from Jim Collins. And so asking people, what is their it? I might ask them, what's the most inspiring use of technology for learning in kids that you've ever seen? And the good news is you can go in any school district, any place, anywhere, and really find those exemplar examples where technology has really made a difference for students. But right now, what we're looking at is not are those individual things there, but how pervasive is it? So as people identify the things that they feel has been magic with the technology, and they're always there, we start to ask, what's the percentage of students who are able to have that kind of experience that you're talking about? So Rogers' Diffusion of Innovations talks about the difference between the percentages that represent trailblazers and the percentages that you would expect if anything was identified as a pervasive use, which is about 85%. What you'll notice in the middle of the screen is sort of a representation that today, as we think about ourselves being a cross-generation of moving schools the way they've always been into this new place that there's a lot of conversation, I think technology is that treasure. It is that secret ingredient that we're able to shape and make more happen. But we're not going to get past trailblazer numbers as long as technology use is left optional. And that means that teachers have to be in the mood or not in the mood or could be in the mood. The transition point is administrators. So the group that's called settlers, moving into about 50% of the system, doing anything specific that you think's worth the time and dime, is highly dependent on the administrators and leaders in a district. So right now, with the initiative of the ISTE Net Standards for Administrators, it's just the right timing to begin to talk about how do we help administrators get very congruent and take on the leadership of moving visions into practice for all students, not just letting the good things happen for a small group. So that's what I've been seeing, is dealing with optional and dealing with the next layer of change that's needed that highly engages our leaders in those conversations.
Well, you know, you've been doing this tech planning and these technology impact studies for what, 20 years? So what do you see that helps schools organize that their implementation really does gather more results?
Well, I think in the beginning, most of our tech plans were purchase orders. They were shopping lists. And when the federal money came out, people said, well, it can't just be about shopping. We want to talk about what is the connections to learning. What do we want to have happen for that? So we had a lot of people working the midnight hour, usually technology leaders, trying to get the grants written. And what they would do is use these words like enhancing and enriching or integrating across the curriculum, which to me sounded like great words until I had to start doing the evaluation programs. So one of the things in looking at the goals is to notice the difference between a goal that's about the stuff and the adults versus goals that are about results for students. So I want to just say to teachers and administrators and families in the communities, what's the story that you're telling about your technology uses? And whatever that story is that the story that you wanted to buy for your students? So I have a cartoon on the slide that's a sheep in the woods being chased by a wolf in the woods. And they got a grant. So they bought themselves some technology. And when you look at this story, you can see the cars zooming even in the flat screen and moving around. But if you squint past the technology, do you have a new story, or do you just have a more expensive story that existed without spending that money? Mm-hmm. Because what we're really looking for is what stories are you able to tell that you wouldn't be able to tell if you didn't have those kind of tools? At this time, and I think always, when money is tight and we're having to make tough decisions, people really want to understand what's the added value. What are we getting that we couldn't have without spending this money? So we have this window of time, and still have it, to create these incredible stories. And at the end of the day, what we say to people is, what are the stories you're telling, and is that the story that you want to keep funding? Because this wolf and sheep have to go out and get a new sponsor when this technology becomes obsolete. And that's the first question the sponsor is going to answer is, why would we fund you again? So I think that's the conversation. The next slide talks about defining integration. I know like enriching and enhancing seem like the right words, and out of respect for our colleagues, those of us who were on the grant writing and the planning, we didn't want to tromp into their territory. So out of courtesy, we didn't get prescriptive. And using words like enriching and enhancing says, well, it's about learning, but you decide. Because I don't know if you mean you want 2 enrichings and 3 enhancings or 3 each. But what happens is you end up, when you walk around the buildings and try to figure out what it is, you end up counting who's using the technology. And the same thing with integrating. It pretty much means do something, do anything, just use it. And then the only way we can talk about the added value is how many people are doing it and how many using it that they're doing. So that conversation sort of led me to the next piece, that something I've used for over 20 years, whether it's been technology planning, staff development design. I've done about 2,300 school districts impact reports, and it's keeping the eye on what's the category of use of technology that you have. And these 3 uses came from like ACOT studies and the diffusion of innovations, but I simplified them into 3 categories so that we could sort them instructionally. The first one is really about literacy, and it means the literacy, the knowingness of technology. That the stories you tell are about kids doing podcasts, kids knowing how to use PowerPoint, or kids using and practicing the tools. So I'll go to a principal and say, what's the most inspiring thing that you've seen? And they'll say, all the kids do PowerPoint. And what I hear is a technology story in my ear. And I said, well, what are they doing with PowerPoint? And he says, well, I don't know, but they're all doing it. Everybody loves it. You'll see that there's a picture of the tools there and the word knots. And I'm going to come back to the knots, lots, and hots because that's kind of the final summary. So once we connect the technology to the curriculum, we're in either 2 categories, the adapting or the transforming. And the yellow zone is the adapting. And I've got a sheep theme going on here, so imagine those sheep crunching on there. But the traditional role of school for many, many years is for kids to be information consumers. That we have a body of knowledge that we want them to know. We organize for them to know it. And then they give it back to us and they get their grade based on that. So that information consumption is lower order thinking skills. It's Bloom's taxonomy of kids being able to receive information and give it back. Well, for about the last, 15, 20 years, we've talked about a set of skills in which kids have to be more than consumers. So in the transforming category, what you have is kids being information producers, that they have to work on real life problems, go beyond the existing information and make sense of the world, make sense of the information, collaborate with others, reach outside their schools. In that category of transforming, you really have kids being creators. So if we are looking at the 3 categories from an instructional point of view, in the literacy category, curriculum is not the point. And I'll see projects in which the information's superficial. It's barely there because the point was to do the technology. Right. In the adapting category, you get lots, you get summary reports, and quite frankly, most schools have about 80 to 85% of the projects and work that kids do being summary reports. Tell me about Anibas or George Washington. This 3rd category doesn't take up very much space in our classrooms in general before technology ever arrived. So basically it's a place in which kids are being the leaders, the teachers, the collaborators, and the teacher has a little bit different role here in sort of helping kids have a container for really deeply learning things. So it's the hot category. These 3 categories I can use to code staff development, I can use to code interviews, I can use to code student work, and we can use to set goals. So that's sort of the hub of this, and people can certainly email me or go out to my website to pick out a more detailed part of this sheet. But at the end of the day, it's not going to be about which category is right or wrong, but which one do you think gives you the most money, value, and time value. And I want to say one thing. Adapting and transforming costs about 6 times more dollars to the system than the literacy mode. And what we're looking at is when we do distributive equipment and we have one-to-one initiatives, are we getting 6 times more benefits than if the kids were taking a class down the hall about technology? So that's the categories and sort of the core of saying all uses are not equal. We have to start saying do we think will give us our better value for the dollars we're investing.
This is great because, we've all been walking around for, 10, 15 years now saying, let's find the authentic use of these new tools. And the tools keep changing, and really our use of them doesn't. We're still plastering the old methodology onto the new tool that comes down the pike. And people are wondering why, after the billions of dollars that education has spent on technology, nothing is really changing. And our students aren't leaving our hallowed halls prepared for their life, prepared for a productive life of learning and synthesizing and creating and quite frankly, of competing. So to see it, just clearly outlined in such a nice, simple way, and yet when you speak about it, it makes so much sense. The difference between the literacy and the adapting, and then looking at what the transforming is. Now, how can this framework, though, where do we start with the principals? How can it help principals target the benefits that they want to get from technology? So the principles.
First, I want to say it's taken us a huge amount of work to get to where we're at, and we have wonderful exemplar examples. It's just that they're pockets, and we really want to say it's time to start shifting the gears and start harvesting the best of the best. That out of the resource time that any school has, however much equipment they have, are we going to the highest ground that we can go? Or are we just happy that kids are touching it and teachers are using it?
Right.
So the first thing I would say to principals, who again are that critical gear shifting group to get out of the trailblazers who have given us these models and start to really harvest it for the rest of the school, I would say to leaders, be curious. Now that the equipment is in your building, how is it used? So we're going to look at the next slide to sort of represent either informally or formally helping the leadership, and that would be the principals, the curriculum directors, probably the media specialists, and anyone who's formally or informally responsible for helping technology work well. But to sort of together start to walk your halls and start to code what you see in the halls as, well, when I see that in the classroom, first of all, is it even being used? Because I will tell you again, out of my many walkthroughs, at any one time, about 70 to 75% of the equipment in the classrooms is not in use. There are reasons for that, and they usually tell me I walk through the 1 nanosecond that it was all off, because every other part of the day they were using it. So we walk through 2 or 3 times to sort of dispel that myth. But in fact, teachers have so much work to do that the technology often becomes what I call tween time. So that means between whatever time they have to get one objective done in the other. Now, that is not true of every classroom or every teacher, but we're looking at the pattern of use in the building. So we do a walkthrough with our principals, and we say, look at the whiteboards. How are they being used? Look at the docu-cameras. What are the projects kids are doing and not doing? And what's really interesting is that the technologies that fit the adapting pedagogy, that means students being information consumers, are the ones that are most enthusiastically and sort of virally adopted. I mean, PowerPoint fit. Mm-hmm. There you go. PowerPoint fits a pedagogy, and not that it can't be bent towards something else, but it fits our understanding of kids reporting out what they know and able to do. I have a school district that spent millions of dollars on whiteboards, and we did a walkthrough in every building. And they were really disappointed. They were 3 years in. They had directed their teachers that if the kids were holding the stylus, then they were doing the highest performance with those whiteboards. And by the way, it's good that the kids have the stylus, but because kids are participating does not mean that they're doing rigorous work at that whiteboard. So we saw a lot of whiteboards not in use or shining up assignments and walking through there. So I'm going to come to the point of how we kind of get in that snag and shift gears. But I saw the other day a visual of Bloom's taxonomy and the tools, and a wiki was placed at the top as the highest Bloom's vocabulary for create. And I thought it was really interesting because if I were to see a wiki and it was about Mark Twain and the kids were repackaging existing information, unless there was something else driving that, I'm not seeing anything but an adapting use. And that's not to say wikis can't create more happening, but the goal of packaging the information inside of a wiki and stopping there creates that.
Right, it's that whole regurgitation piece again. If they're just, hunting for it and spitting it back out at us, that's not what we're looking for. Yeah.
Well, and I think we get enthusiastic that a teacher's willing to do a wiki and has thought about it, and I'm not saying that that's a negative thing, but at the end of the walkthrough, we want to see what's the pattern of use. What you're seeing on the screen right now is pretty much a common pattern out of all of my walkthroughs. And the reason it's a common pattern is because the technology has been left optional. We've been very happy if teachers were even willing to have it in their rooms and use it. And yet at the end of the day, we haven't been having these other conversations about if it were there and we were using it, what is it we're really expecting? So I'll just leave this as a conversation that says we want our principals to start walking through, to start noticing, and to start taking the glitter out of their eyes and look past the stuff. Look at the kids and look at the work.
I'm so glad you brought the piece up about the interactive whiteboards because, in my 15 years of teaching and supporting technology with teachers in a few different schools, I've never seen a piece of hardware adopted so readily by teachers from every layer of technology comfortability. And I always wondered about that. And listening to you last week, we were out in Denver together, and I did hear your presentation. And listening to you talk about that, you mentioned, well, here's the thing. This is a piece of technology, a piece of hardware that gives everybody the impression that we're moving forward, we're advancing and getting into more sophisticated uses of technology. But really, it's just a tool if it's not used with all the sophistication that it's capable of. It's just doing the same old pedagogical method with a fancier, shinier pencil. Not
so
as a
let me just say
blackboard.
one more thing about leaders. I absolutely have seen transforming practices with whiteboards. But when the training is about learning the tool, and of course there's examples, and then they go back and their goal is to use the tool rather than to be modeling and increasing their mastery of an instructional practice, then as long as the teachers are using it, they've actually met their principal's agenda. The last Net Day survey that I looked at had 77% of their teachers reporting no pressure from their principals to use the internet. And I would say that's fairly common in my experience throughout the assessments, because teachers are left to decide or not decide what they will or won't do with the technology. So we really have a huge gap to fill, and again the leader stands right there in the gap with the ability to take the tools we have and make more happen, or to let it just sort of be whatever it goes to. And Maggie, what you're saying here is that teachers revert back to what's familiar and what's known and what's comfortable. This is not about pointing fingers at teachers. It's about saying, what's the expectation? And if I'm using it, haven't I met the expectation of the people who installed the equipment? So what I will tell you, in that walkthrough, out of 40 buildings, we probably only saw 2% transforming uses of the whiteboards. And people were a little down because that was not their intention, to spend the money and not have results. So
right, and I guess I can speak from Ramapo, by my experience there. I did see the teachers jump on board with these things, and I guess now that they're all comfortable with the actual nuts and bolts of the tool, now is when we can start bringing it up a notch, kicking it up a level too. Because in all fairness, you have to realize too that teachers. I love teachers. I love their spirit. I love their dedication. I love their vision. But let's face it, they're under that crunch to meet those state standards. So my next question to you, Vern, is how do we use these technologies to accelerate kids mastering the NET standards or the AASL standards and still meet the agenda for meeting those state standards and making sure that teachers are covering their end for the requirement that they are absolutely bound to with the state standardized testing? I mean, it's that dichotomy.
Right. And so this is a part where I want to hand out, even to the avatars, those Chinese finger pulls, where the only way you can really get your fingers out is to go the opposite of what your instinct is. So we have study after study, experience after experience, that kids who are engaged, who have rigorous tasks, who are better thinkers, actually are better test score takers. That the boredom that is rampant with our kids is actually contrary to the attention that we need from them to be able to master any number of standards. So the first picture you saw, the man looking through the binoculars past the cars and at the sheep in the woods story, I'm just going to say start as an administrator, as a leader, a teacher leader, peer past the stuff and start to be really curious about how much fire and heat is behind the tasks. So I have this metaphor, turning up the heat, that I've had for probably 15 years. I've just really solidified it. I'm getting ready to write a book in which we merge inquiry, digital media, and kids as meaning makers and media makers together. And I've had the great pleasure of working with 2 districts a week to 2 weeks a month to take a look at what it's going to take for the teachers to sort of make that bridge. So turning up the heat is a metaphor. But think of it as 5 pepper, 6 pepper, or that some people are just content to have green, gold, bland. So if you'll play with that metaphor a little bit, you can have a great amount of fun with the teachers. And by the way, fun has a lot of energy in it, even for adults. So the first thing is give me an H, and an H is for higher order thinking. So when you're designing the tasks, and certainly when you design the task, you also have to have the next steps of saying, well, what do I need to do to master? And I'm going to have you go back to the H for just a minute. That we're not only wanting the rigor, but we're wanting to know that kids are being knowledge producers, that they're having to make a decision, look at a body of knowledge and information and make a decision, or an invention or a solution. We want them analyzing. We want them synthesizing. And out of that, if kids are going to be giving you a product that demonstrates what they know and understand, which comes from Wiggins' work of saying, how will kids demonstrate what they know and understand? We want kids to know what's the type of communication, what's the purpose of that. So if you'll go to the next slide, I have on my website a set of scoring guides that are not a scoring guide for multimedia, not a scoring guide for movies or podcasts, but quite frankly, it's a scoring guide on saying, what's your purpose? If you're doing a public service announcement, whether it's in a comic book form or a movie or a podcast or in Second Life or wherever it is that you're organizing with the technology, what you're really saying is that there's a certain way to organize a powerful public service announcement and make sure it gets delivered so that teachers can coach for that rigor, and you coach for that rigor in their narratives, their storylines, and you for sure coach that rigor in the storyboard. There's not enough technology in the world to decorate up superficial thinking and thin thinking. So if we're going to take the time to create these multimedia products, let's put more rigor in there and let the type of communication guide the rigor and the purpose. So the next piece that we look at is give me an E. We've talked about engaged learning, engaged learners, the piece about boredom with kids. It turns out that boredom actually thins the cortex, the membrane of the cortex, and that sustained boredom actually changes the chemistry of the brain.
I knew it.
And
go ahead.
Well, it's a problem. It's not something you tell your kids get over at schools like that, and you have to be 18 before you get to have a life. We know that kids who are driving the questions, we create cultures of curiosity. So the good news is you can turn that around pretty fast with rigorous questions. So we made questions in Forsyth County Schools in our project be the core technology that we used, that we help teachers know the difference between closed questions that were fact-based and open questions that were reasoning, thinking questions. And it really is just a matter of how active can you get the brain and get them into flow states, and who's driving those questions. So keeping the eye on the question of the task. So someone wonders, well, what would you see at a whiteboard if it was transforming? I would be looking for what-if questions, that you had information and you would move it around and you'd move it into new patterns, that kids would be able to take that information and have some reasoning question, whether the kid was holding the stylus or the teacher was holding the stylus. If you peer past the stuff and look for a driving question, you're going to find some heat. So the next letter is give me an A. And you know what? These are high-yielding instructional strategies. All of these strategies led out by Marzano, by many wonderful thought leaders. And it turns out that when kids have a context for learning, they actually can learn more information, dense information, and they'll put more energy to it. So A is for authenticity, either having a simulated audience or a authentic audience where kids are not trained to solve problems, but they're actually given problems to solve that contribute to the community. There's a really nice word here called cognitive coaching. Cognitive apprenticeship. And what it means is that you be the historian, and what are the tools and the kinds of problems that historians solve. You be the scientist, you be the journalist, you be whatever that hat is that you put on. If you've been following Grant Wiggins' work, he has something called the graphs task. And that means that what's the goal, what's the audience, what's the situation, what's the product. It's pretty simple as saying, what's the point of learning this? Ted McCaney has a wonderful book called Teaching for Tomorrow, in which he has the kids role play in high school. He sets up a context and a reason why they would go after learning a lot of information. And he's very intentional about what that essential question is, what the problem task is. Again, these are not new strategies. They're just coming together. And the role for technology is so exciting here because technology can actually connect them and accelerate them. So let's just talk about the student who only turns in their assignment to the teacher versus they can publish to the world. Just that one medium allows so much more to happen. So we're doing a international debate right now with voice threads. Kids are doing asynchronous debates with countries, and they're having this huge audience, and it gives it so much power. The last one really is the T, and it's for technology. But what it says is that it's the end of all the instructional decisions. How you use the technology is fashioned into the instructional decisions that are made along the way. And do you have added value? Have you made something that would have been impossible or impaired happen before that?
Bernajean, you brought a clip with you. And I have seen this clip before, and I'll share my own reaction to it later. But I think this would be a good time to show that clip and then to talk a little bit about what we see in it.
Today, what the class is working on is a Ning networking program for the Founding Fathers. What they were required to do was to research a Founding Father. Each student has a different Founding Father. And they researched their historical significance, their economic information, their political influence, and then they had to create a MySpace type of Ning community where they will put their research into a lifelike experience, making it more relevant, where they have to play the Founding Father.
All right, well, I'm Samuel Adams, you know, the cool guy, and well, I'm talking about, right now, I'm posting a blog about the Stamp Act and the Sugar Act, and how I'm enraged that Britain has still got a chokehold on America, and that Americans should, you know, they should fight against this, and they shouldn't be accepting the fact that they're taxing us without representation.
With this information, they have to add friends as if the Founding Fathers were in today's day and age, based on similar interests or allies that they had back in the 17 and 1800s. Then they also have to blog about experiences, such as if they were making a diary at that time.
I'm James Otis, the guy from No Taxation Without Representation, and my page is about just literally me. My friends are Dr. Lehman Holt, Joseph Warren, Cesar Rodney, Abigail Adams, Samuel Adams Parravere. They were part of Sons of Liberty. They were with My Cause, and
I'm writing blogs about how upset I am towards Congress and how they're running this country.
We chose this format so that it's much more relevant to the students. They can take that information and from their daily lives, such as their MySpace knowledge, and utilize it in the classroom. Therefore, they have a little bit more ownership of the project, and they can be more creative with it. Instead of just reading about it and making a poster board, this way it's a collaborative effort where they can actively engage with other students at the same time in real life experience, rather than just getting up and presenting where they're passive learners. They can be actively engaged at all times.
You know, now watching that clip, I know that if I were to share that with administrators and teachers in my school, most of them would think that it was a pretty amazing use of technology.
Yeah, that's the reaction I get, and this clip came out of a district where I trained the administrators to do walkthroughs. So the heat allowed us, the metaphor allowed us to get a little closer. The first thing I look for, besides the fact that she really has used the tools in some amazing ways, is did the kids go beyond existing information? And I really can't see that in the clip that exists. Now, if the kids did all that work stepping into the role of Samuel Adams, one of the other founding fathers, if there were a question that they had to answer, like, what would you advise Obama in this issue? Or, you know, how would you deal with the constitutional issue of this? Then the kids would have to push to go beyond existing information. So she's not far off the track and certainly models a lot of the tools. The point really here is to start looking past the stuff and looking at the task that's sitting in there. That's really the point.
Right, just taking it that extra step into that transformative use. I get it, and that's a great vantage point to look at it from. That a lot of people could be lulled into thinking that this was it, we've reached the pinnacle with this kind of work, and yet there's still other layers that could be explored that go higher into that whole taxonomy of synthesizing and creating new information from the old. So I'm going to ask this big, giant question now, and I'm sure there'll be a lot you have to say about it, but not only do I want to know what are some things that leaders and teachers can do to start getting us there, but where does it begin, Bern? How do we start? When we're all at such different stages of access, different stages of implementation, there's got to be some kind of a guiding principle that rules the day. Where does it start? With the teachers, the administrators?
Well, first of all, it's messy because we're a crossover generation that's really bridging what we have always been and trying to stretch into these new cultures and shapes. So if we have the next picture, one place I look at is what's the professional development, and this is really mission critical. Of course, teachers need to learn the tools, but I find that when teachers learn the tools and they're sent off onto their own, I don't care what tool it is or how amazing it is, they still stay within their sort of context of their pedagogies that they use now. So if the point right now is not hardware but headware. What's the instructional strategies that you want accelerated in your schools? And if you move in whiteboards or one-to-one initiatives, that is the perfect time to move in the instructional strategies that you expect to see rehearsed, practiced, and mastered. And that's what you keep your eye on measuring, not are teachers doing it and have they learned the skills, but if they have the skills, what do you want to have happen? Here is one of the BFOs that I experienced in all the technology impact studies. If I coded the staff development titles, literacy, adapting, transforming, and then I went out and did observations in the buildings, walkthroughs, or I even coded student work because we gathered up student digital work and coded it. We found almost the same pattern occurring in the observations as in the staff development titles, because the unintended consequences are they learn the tool first and then somewhere maybe they instructionally connect it to some pedagogy that we think has added value. And that would be different than moving through the instruction. If we go to the next slide, I just want to again say we've got great teachers. They're doing great jobs. We just have new territory to go to. So if you would just go ahead and go to the next slide. One of the things I'm looking at is that teachers learn the tools inside of instructional practices. And the storytelling camps that I lead are really about learning 6 or 7 tools, but the goal is to create a piece of information here and learn how to read and write multimedia. And if you go to the next slide, I just say, here's the 2 words. You want kids to be able to rehearse meaning making and then media making. And I don't care what the technology is, that's the rehearsal. And if we get that in place instead of technology in the front line, we're going to have more instructional results. Now, you asked me where a starting place is, and this is not to be flippant. I'm going to ask you to go to the next slide. It turns out that whatever we're doing today is getting us the results. If we don't change instructional strategies, we're not going to have any different results and outcomes for our kids. So along with the tools has to come a resetting of what's the instructional practice and content. Cambridge says instructional technology is going to be demanding something like 30 to 50% change in content and instructional practices. And of course, with the 21st century standards and the net standards, we know that that really is a stretch for people. So here's my comment. I had a wonderful experience with Edward Demings, who is the man who caused all that trouble in Japan, turned it from a junkyard into this, electronic empire. And he was asked at 90 years old in this satellite conference I was in, how long is it going to take to change schools? And I ask people that, and some people say never. Some people say so long that I'll be gone. And, people are really frustrated at the rate of change that schools happen. So people said, oh yeah, he's an old man, he doesn't know. But he said, it's not going to take any time at all to change. It's going to take a long time to decide. And once you decide, the system will start to organize intentionally towards that. So I have an expression called da chino, which says, if it's important, if it's a commitment we make to our kids, it has to happen. It doesn't matter how many potholes, how hard it is. We have to stay steady to what the sacred work is. And we have very sacred work ahead. And not to get distracted by the stuff, but to stay steady to, our commitment to kids that we're going to make this space for them to be in this world that we'll probably never see. So I'm going to leave it there and say, as a cross-generation, the people I see in this room and my colleagues, I admire us so much to stand there in the fray of all the messes, but I know we can do it if we stay steady and that we know what our commitment is, and it's not about the stuff.
Oh, Bernajean, many thanks as always for sharing your thoughtful insights and experiences with us here tonight. I always love learning with you, my friend.
And I want to thank you. I know this is a big topic, but I'm very enthusiastic that we can keep the pressure there. But we've got to get over the techno-lust and start saying, if we have this stuff, where can we go? So thank you so much for this conversation tonight, and ISTE, who plays a strong leadership role, and the sponsors who create opportunities that we can have these conversations. And I really appreciate it.
That's great. Folks, we'd just like to remind you that an archive of tonight's show will be available shortly at www.iste-eduverse.org. Now, if you haven't already joined ISTE's in-world group and listserv, please join today and be among the first to learn about upcoming events and past show archives. You can do that by visiting iste.org/Second Life for more info. I know you've enjoyed tonight's presentation with Bernajean as much as I have, and I know you'll all join me in thanking her. And until next time, this is Peggy Sheehy signing off. Keep deciding.